before Amenhotep II ever grips a bow, before his name is carved beside scenes of bound enemies and shattered rebellions. The throne waiting for him is already soaked in conquest. Egypt in the middle of the 18th dynasty is not merely a kingdom gathered along the Nile. It is an imperial machine stretched across deserts, river valleys, mountain roads, fortified towns, temple estates, and distant courts that have learned to measure their safety by the mood of a pharaoh hundreds of miles away. The Nile still rises and falls with the old rhythm. Farmers still watch the floodline climb against the embankments. Priests still open sanctuary doors before dawn, and scribes still bend over rolls of papyrus. Yet beyond this familiar landscape, Egypt has changed. Its kings no longer think only in terms of borders. They think in terms of reach. That reach is largely the work of Amenhotep II's father, Thutmose III, the ruler later remembered as one of ancient Egypt's greatest conquerors. Over decades of campaigning, he drives Egyptian power deep into the Levant, battles coalitions of local rulers, crosses rivers, establishes garrisons, demands tribute, and binds distant cities to the court at Thebes. To the south, Egypt's control extends into Nubia, where forts, administrators, troops, and royal representatives turn conquest into something more permanent. Gold travels north. Timber, metals, luxury goods, horses, captives, crafted objects, and foreign tribute move into Egyptian hands. The empire is not a single block of obedient territory. It is a chain of pressure points, some secure, some resentful, some waiting for weakness. This is the world into which Amenhotep II is born. He does not inherit a quiet throne protected by geography alone. He inherits expectations created by victory. Every conquered city becomes a future obligation. Every tribute list becomes a promise that the next king must somehow continue. Every foreign prince who bows before Thutmose III may later test whether the son possesses the same force as the father. Empire magnifies wealth, but it also magnifies danger. The farther Egyptian authority reaches, the more places there are for that authority to crack. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy. The official image of this empire is dazzling. Temple walls display processions of tribute bearers. Exotic materials appear in workshops and storehouses. Foreign names are recorded beneath the feet of the king. Amun, the great god of Thebes, is praised as the divine source of royal success. Victory is presented not as a matter of chance, supply, negotiation, exhaustion, or fear, but as the natural result of cosmic order. Egypt stands at the center. The pharaoh acts for the gods. Foreign rebellion is chaos. Defeating it is almost a sacred maintenance task, like restoring a wall or clearing a canal. The reality underneath is much harder. Armies must be fed across long distances. Chariot horses require fodder, water, care, replacement, and trained handlers. Weapons must be repaired. Roads must be watched. Messengers must move quickly enough for commands to matter. Local governors may submit publicly while calculating privately. Garrisons depend on cooperation with nearby communities. Egyptian officers have to know when to threaten, when to negotiate, and when to accept that a report sent home should sound more decisive than events on the ground actually were. What survives in the record suggests an empire maintained by constant performance as much as by constant force. At home, the system draws strength from the Nile Valley's capacity to produce and organize. Grain collected through taxation can support soldiers, laborers, temple personnel, and state projects. Scribes turn harvest into numbers, numbers into rations, and rations into movement. Temples are not merely religious spaces, they are economic institutions with land, workshops, cattle, staff, storage, and political influence. The priesthood of Amun grows powerful alongside the monarchy, because conquest enriches the god as well as the king. A victorious pharaoh offers wealth to Amun. Amun, in return, legitimizes the pharaoh's victories. It is a partnership wrapped in incense and carved in stone. Amenhotep II's future reputation cannot be understood without this structure. He will later be presented as a warrior of almost unnatural strength, a ruler who bends the world through personal power. Yet no pharaoh acts alone. Behind every royal charge stands a bureaucracy. Behind every scene of the king striking enemies stands a network of commanders, translators, scouts, stable masters, boat crews, metal workers, priests, and accountants. The king's body becomes the symbol of the whole machine. His muscles represent the army. His bow represents the state. His chariot represents the speed of command. His violence represents the punishment the empire claims it can deliver anywhere. This symbolism matters because the succession is not emotionally neutral. Thutmose III has created a standard difficult to follow. A son taking the throne after such a ruler faces a problem that cannot be solved by simply preserving what already exists. Preservation looks weaker than expansion. Caution can be interpreted as fear. Diplomacy can appear like retreat. If the empire's distant subjects believe that Egypt's new king is less formidable, rebellion may spread not because Egypt suddenly becomes powerless, but because confidence is part of power. Once enough rulers suspect that punishment will not come, obedience becomes negotiable. Scholars still debate important details of the transition between Thutmose III and Amenhotep II, including the nature and duration of any co-regency. The evidence remains incomplete, and royal chronology is rarely as clean as later king lists make it appear. But the political pressure surrounding the succession is easier to see. Amenhotep II enters kingship under comparison. He's measured against a father whose campaigns have already become the language of imperial authority. The young ruler must convince Egypt, its army, its priests, and its foreign dependencies that the force behind the throne has not weakened. Even his royal identity is shaped by this need. The pharaoh is not introduced to the world as an ordinary heir gradually learning statecraft. He is fashioned as the ideal warrior prince before he fully becomes the king. His training, body, speed, endurance, skill with horses, and command of weapons are all turned into evidence that Egypt remains dangerous. Whether every feat attributed to him occurred exactly as recorded is less important than the function of the claims. They are not casual boasts, they are strategic messages. The empire, meanwhile, is full of listeners. In Syria Palace, rulers who have watched Egyptian armies come and go understand that distance can create opportunity. In Nubia, administrators and local elites know that royal commands travel along the river, but do not erase local ambition. At Thebes and Memphis, officials know that the next reign will redistribute favour. Military men know that a new king may elevate some careers and end others. Priests know that royal devotion can bring land and treasure. This is the hidden inheritance of Amenhotep II, not only wealth, territory, and prestige, but a throne that demands demonstration. The empire forged before his birth is magnificent, but it is also restless. Its borders are held by fear, reward, ritual, logistics, and memory. Its enemies remember defeat, but they also remember that pharaohs die. Its officials praise stability, but they prepare for change. Its monuments proclaim permanence, while every living participant understands how fragile power can be. So before Amenhotep II becomes the ruler later associated with terrifying punishments and theatrical displays of force, he is first the heir to a dangerous equation. Egypt's authority depends on being seen as irresistible. His father has made that belief enormous. The son will have to make it personal. The answer begins not in a throne room, but in the controlled violence of royal training grounds. Amenhotep II is raised in a court where kingship is expected to look effortless, even though almost nothing about it is. A prince destined for rule has to master ritual, language, administration, hunting, chariotry, archery, and the disciplined display of confidence. He is not merely taught how to fight, he is taught how to be seen fighting. Every movement carries political meaning, because in the world created by Thutmose III, the body of the future king must reassure Egypt before the crown ever touches his head. Royal texts later present Amenhotep II as an athlete without equal. He rose more powerfully than trained crewmen. He handles horses with unusual skill. He shoots arrows through targets that would defeat ordinary archers. He drives a chariot at speed while controlling the reins and drawing a heavy bow. The image is so polished that it immediately raises suspicion. Ancient royal inscriptions are not neutral biographies. They're carefully shaped declarations, designed to make power appear natural, divine, and overwhelming. Yet propaganda does not always begin from nothing. Amenhotep II may well have been physically gifted, intensively trained, and deeply invested in martial skill. The uncertainty lies not in whether he trained, but in how far the surviving claims magnify real ability into something close to superhuman. One of the most famous stories concerns archery practice against copper targets. The king, or the prince before him, is said to drive arrows through plates of metal while riding in a chariot, a feat later celebrated as proof that no rival could match his strength. The surviving language emphasizes not merely accuracy but penetration. The arrow passing through a target that seems almost impossibly resistant. Modern readers often imagine a solid slab of thick copper, but the actual nature of the target is uncertain. It may have been thinner, specially prepared, or described with deliberate exaggeration. Scholars still debate how literally such feats should be understood. What matters politically is clear. The future ruler is presented as a man whose weapons pass through barriers. This is more than athletic vanity. In Egyptian ideology, the king is expected to contain order within his person. His strength is not only his own, it is the strength of Egypt concentrated into a single body. When Amenhotep II draws a bow, the action symbolizes the ability of the state to strike far beyond the Nile Valley. When he controls horses, he displays command over speed, foreign technology, and the elite machinery of war. When he rows without fatigue, he demonstrates endurance. The message is repeated in different forms until the prince no longer appears as a young man learning to rule, but as the physical proof that rule already belongs to him. Horses are especially important to this image. They are still relatively new symbols of elite power in Egypt, introduced into a military culture transformed during the early New Kingdom. They require specialized care and connect the royal court to wider networks across Western Asia. Chariotry is expensive, technical, and prestigious. A prince skilled with horses is not simply athletic, he is fluent in the most advanced military language available to his age. A decorated box associated with Amenhotep II captures this carefully constructed identity. combining luxury craftsmanship with the memory of a king famous for force. Objects like this remind us that royal propaganda did not live only on monumental walls. It circulated through portable things, courtly spaces, gifts, burial equipment, and the intimate material world surrounding the ruler. The training of a royal prince would also have been social. Amenhotep II grows among officials, military companions, tutors, stable personnel, and sons of elite families whose futures may become tied to his own. In such an environment, skill creates loyalty. A prince who appears fearless in the training field can attract men who expect future advancement under a warrior king. Shared discipline becomes political preparation. By the time he rules, the officers around him do not merely serve an institution. Some may remember the young prince who rode, hunted, practiced, and competed beside them. There is a colder dimension to this education. Hunting scenes and military exercises teach not only precision but emotional control. The ideal pharaoh does not hesitate. He acts at the correct moment and appears untouched by fear. Royal imagery often places the king above panic, confusion, and physical vulnerability. Animals scatter, enemies collapse, horses surge forward, but the ruler remains composed. This composure is another form of intimidation. The most dangerous man in the image is not the one shouting. It is the one who seems calm while violence unfolds around him. Amenhotep II's later reputation for harshness grows from this cultivated stillness. Long before accounts of captives and executions, the court is already building a visual language in which his body becomes an instrument of judgment. The prince is shown as powerful enough to punish, disciplined enough to control that power, and divinely favoured enough to make punishment appear legitimate. The distinction between sport and war begins to blur. Archery practice becomes a forecast of conquest. Horse mastery becomes a promise of rapid retaliation. Physical endurance becomes evidence that rebellion cannot outlast him. The religious dimension completes the transformation. Amenhotep II is not merely a talented human athlete. He is embedded in the sacred identity of kingship, especially in relation to Amun and Horus. The falcon, long associated with Horus, offers a particularly revealing symbol. A royal falcon linked to Amenhotep II, found near the ancient burial landscape of Abydos, has continued to attract scholarly attention because it condenses several layers of meaning into one-form speed, height, predatory vision, divine legitimacy, and the king's ability to descend upon enemies from above. The ruler as falcon is not simply admired. He is feared as something that sees farther and strikes faster than ordinary men. This symbolism also complicates the modern temptation to describe Amenhotep II only as brutal. Violence in his world is wrapped in theology. The king's strength is presented as service to divine order. His enemies are not described as political opponents with understandable motives, but as rebels against the structure of the world. Once that language is accepted, punishment becomes sacred duty. A prince trained inside this system learns that physical superiority is not a private quality, it is moral proof. Yet the evidence remains incomplete. We do not know Amenhotep II's private temperament as a young man. We cannot recover the quiet moments after training, the injuries, frustrations, rivalries, or fears erased from official memory. The monuments preserve a body without weakness. They do not preserve the effort required to create it. They show the arrow-piercing metal, not the thousands of failed shots that may have come before. They show the controlled horses, not the labour of those who fed, groomed, and trained them. They show the prince as a finished weapon. That weapon is being prepared for a specific political need. Egypt's empire must believe that Thutmose III's son will not merely inherit power but embody it. The prince therefore becomes a public argument. His shoulders, arms, balance, stamina, and command of animals all answer the same unspoken question: will the next ruler be strong enough? By the end of his youth, Amenhotep II has been made into more than an heir. He has been made into a warning. Before foreign rulers know how he will govern, they are meant to know what he can do. Before Egyptian officials know which policies he will choose, they are meant to trust the force of his presence. The court has taken a young prince and shaped him into the ideal image of war-controlled, tireless, sacred, and already aimed beyond the horizon. A warning, however, has to survive the death of the man who created it. When Thutmose III's long reign finally ends, Egypt does not simply receive a new king. It experiences a dangerous pause, a moment when every official, priest, commander, provincial ruler, and foreign court must decide whether the power accumulated under one pharaoh will remain intact under another. Amenhotep II has been trained to answer that uncertainty with his body, but accession demands something more difficult than strength. He must take control of a system built around his father's victories without appearing to be merely the lesser figure who follows them. The exact shape of this transition remains debated. Some scholars have argued for a period of co-regency, in which Amenhotep II ruled alongside Thutmose III before becoming sole king. Others have questioned how long such an overlap lasted, or whether the evidence truly requires a formal co-regency at all. Egyptian royal dates can be deceptively difficult. Regnal years may be counted differently. Monuments may be completed after a ruler's death, and later inscriptions can compress complicated transitions into smooth stories of divine succession. What survives in the record suggests preparation and continuity, but no single reconstruction resolves every chronological problem. The possibility of co-rule matters because it changes how Amenhotep II's rise is understood. If he shared power with his father, even briefly, then his early kingship begins under direct supervision from one of the most experienced rulers Egypt had known. He would have learned government not as an abstract art, but from within the machinery of empire, watching appointments, receiving reports, observing diplomatic gifts, and seeing how military threats were translated into temple inscriptions. Yet a co-regency would also deepen the shadow over him. The son would not enter the throne alone. He would first occupy it beside the man whose reputation dominated the age. If there was no meaningful co-regency, the pressure may have been even sharper. A sudden transition from Thutmose III's authority to that of a younger ruler would create an immediate test. Foreign dependencies could interpret the change as weakness. Court factions could seek advantage. Men who had built their careers under the old king might hesitate before attaching themselves fully to the new one. The accession ceremony could proclaim perfect continuity, but political reality would require that continuity to be demonstrated. Amenhotep II's mother, Meritri Hatshepsut, belonged to the highest level of the royal household, and her position helped anchor his legitimacy. Yet royal blood alone never settled every question in the 18th dynasty. The dynasty's recent history had already shown how succession could become complicated by premature deaths, competing lines, powerful queens, and rulers whose authority had to be justified through carefully constructed claims. Amenhotep II may not have spent his earliest years with complete certainty that he would inherit. The evidence is incomplete, but the very possibility would have made his eventual elevation all the more dependent on preparation, alliances, and visible competence. Once crowned, He assumes a full royal identity designed to make the transition appear inevitable. His throne name, Akeperur, places him inside the sacred grammar of kingship. He is no longer merely Amenhotep, the prince trained in stables and archery grounds. He becomes the divine office embodied, the guarantor of order, the chosen son of the gods. Ritual transforms uncertainty into certainty. Priests proclaim what politics must now enforce. The temples play a central role in this transformation. At Karnak, the great cult complex of Amun stands as both spiritual center and monumental archive of royal power. Thutmose III has already filled sacred space with records of campaigns, offerings, building projects, and divine favor. Amenhotep II must add himself to that landscape without disappearing inside it. Each inscription, statue, stela, and offering becomes a declaration that Amun has not withdrawn support from Egypt. The new king kneels before the god in one image and crushes disorder in another. Submission to the divine and domination of the human world are presented as two sides of the same office. One surviving statue captures the quieter side of this royal performance. Amenhotep II kneels while offering vessels to Amun, his posture controlled and reverent. It is a striking contrast to the aggressive image of the archer and conqueror, yet the contrast is only apparent. The kneeling king is not weakened by devotion. His authority is strengthened by it. He receives legitimacy from the god whose temples benefit from imperial wealth. The violence of the state is thus wrapped in sacred exchange. Conquest brings offerings. Offerings confirm divine favor, and divine favor justifies further conquest. This relationship is especially important after Thutmose III. The father's victories had been closely linked to Amun's support, and Amenhotep II cannot allow that divine partnership to appear personal to the dead king alone. He has to inherit not only the throne but the god's approval. Royal inscriptions therefore emphasize that the same cosmic order continues through him. The king has changed, but the divine force behind Egypt has not. Still, monuments cannot prevent comparison. Amenhotep II governs in a landscape crowded with his father's achievements. Thutmose III's campaign records, tribute scenes, and building works remain visible. Officials who served the previous reign carry living memories of decisions the new king did not make. Veterans remember battles he did not lead. Foreign rulers remember the armies of his father more clearly than the promises of his son. Amenhotep II must become distinct without appearing to break continuity. His solution is to intensify the quality most suited to his public image personal force. Thutmose III's greatness rests on the scale and persistence of his campaigns. Amenhotep II presents himself less as the architect of conquest, and more as its physical incarnation. His father had built the empire. The son will make his own body the proof that it can still punish rebellion. This is not yet the full legend of impossible strength that royal texts will create, but the direction is already clear. The accession turns athletic identity into state policy. The timing is critical. Empires are rarely tested only when they are genuinely weak. They are tested when others suspect weakness might exist. News of a king's death travels outward through rumor, messengers, traders, and diplomatic channels. Each retelling can enlarge uncertainty. A provincial ruler in the Levant does not need to know the precise circumstances at Thebes. He needs only to wonder whether tribute can be delayed, whether neighboring cities will join him, or whether an Egyptian army will really march north again. At home, the new reign must also reward loyalty. Offices, titles, access, and temple patronage help bind the elite to the king. Administrative continuity matters because the empire cannot be rebuilt from nothing every time a ruler dies. Experienced officials remain in place. Regional authorities continue their work, and the flow of grain, gold, labor, and information must not stop. The less visible Amenhotep II's uncertainty appears, the more successful the transition becomes. Yet uncertainty leaves traces in the urgency of his image. The prince trained as a weapon now becomes a king who must be seen using it. The throne beneath him is stable only so long as everyone believes that resistance will be costly. His first years, therefore, carry the tension of a performance in which failure cannot be acknowledged. He must honour his father, inherit his system, satisfy the gods, command the court, and frighten the empire, all while creating a reputation that belongs to him alone. Thutmose III's shadow does not disappear when Amenhotep II is crowned. It follows him into the temple, the council chamber, the training ground, and eventually the battlefield. The young king cannot erase it, so he reshapes it. He takes the inherited memory of conquest and sharpens it into something more personal, more physical, and more threatening. The crown settles on his head, but the real test has only begun. The crown gives Amenhotep II authority, but the monuments give him something more useful, a body that cannot fail. Once king, the athletic prince is no longer remembered merely as gifted. He is enlarged into an almost impossible figure, a ruler whose strength exceeds ordinary measure and whose physical abilities become evidence that Egypt itself remains unconquerable. The distinction between the man and the image begins to dissolve. What had once been training becomes legend, and what had once been skill becomes doctrine. The most famous claims are preserved in royal inscriptions that celebrate his archery, horsemanship, rowing, and endurance. They describe him handling a bow that others cannot draw, controlling teams of horses without assistance, and driving arrows through copper targets while his chariot moves at speed. These feats are presented not as rare achievements, but as natural expressions of his identity. He is not said to struggle, calculate, or improve. He simply performs beyond everyone around him. This language follows a familiar pattern in Egyptian royal ideology. Pharaohs are often shown larger than soldiers, enemies, officials, and God's human servants because scale communicates status. Amenhotep II's propaganda applies the same principle to physical ability. He is not merely depicted as larger. His actions are made larger. The target is harder, the bow heavier, the horses faster, the distance greater, and the king's control more complete. His body becomes monumental even when the monument itself is describing movement. One account places the king in a rowing exercise with hundreds of men. The rowers tire, while Amenhotep II continues. The exact details vary in interpretation, and the text is plainly designed to glorify him, but its political meaning is unmistakable. Rowing is transformed into a demonstration of hierarchy. Trained men reach their limit. The king does not. His endurance separates him from those who serve him and implies that he can carry the state farther than ordinary human effort permits. The surprising detail is that such stories may have worked precisely because they were rooted in recognizable courtly activities. Archery competitions, chariot practice, hunting, rowing, and horse training were not imaginary. Members of the royal household and military elite would have understood what these skills required. They could evaluate technique, strength, balance, and stamina. Propaganda, therefore, did not need to invent an entirely unfamiliar world. It took real disciplines and exaggerated them until Amenhotep II stood beyond comparison. This made the claims more effective than simple fantasy. A foreign ruler might dismiss a godlike metaphor, but a trained archer understands the difficulty of drawing a powerful bow from a moving chariot. An officer understands what it means to control horses under pressure. A crewman understands fatigue. By attaching royal superiority to tasks that specialists knew intimately, the court created propaganda that could be admired, feared, and repeated. The copper target story shows this method at its sharpest. Copper in the late Bronze Age is associated with weapons, tools, armor components, vessels, and prestige objects. It is not an abstract material. It is a substance tied to labor, warfare, and technological skill. To say that the king's arrows pass through copper is therefore to say that his force overcomes the material world of war itself. The image does not merely praise accuracy. It imagines resistance collapsing before him. Modern attempts to reconstruct the feat encounter immediate problems. The thickness and composition of the target are uncertain. The condition of the metal is unknown. The distance, bow design, arrowhead, angle, and exact wording of the inscription all affect what might have been possible. A thin or specially prepared plate could be pierced under the right conditions. A thick, solid target would be far less plausible. Scholars still debate where athletic reality ends and literary inflation begins, and no single explanation fully accounts for every detail. That uncertainty should not be mistaken for uselessness. The inscription tells us something important, even if it cannot be treated as a sports record. It reveals what Amenhotep II wanted his audience to believe about kingship. The ideal ruler is not simply wise, fertile, pious, or wealthy. He is physically dangerous. His legitimacy rests partly on the suggestion that he can do what others cannot, and that his body is a direct extension of divine favor. This is where the image of the athlete becomes darker. A king celebrated for impossible strength is also a king whose punishments appear impossible to resist. The same arm that penetrates copper can penetrate armor. The same hands that control horses can control an army. The same endurance that outlasts a rowing crew can outlast a rebellion. Athletic propaganda prepares the audience emotionally for military violence before the campaigns are even described. The royal body also conceals the collective nature of power. Every feat attributed to Amenhotep II depends on people who disappear from the story. Craftsmen make the bow and arrows. Metal workers prepare the target. Grooms care for the horses. Drivers, stable masters, and trainers develop the teams. Scribes compose the text. Sculptors carve it. Priests place the achievement within sacred language. Officials decide where the inscription will stand. Yet the finished image concentrates all effort into one man. This concentration is politically useful. Empires are complicated, but symbols must be simple. A network of taxation, garrisons, supply routes, diplomacy, and temple administration is difficult to display. A king shooting through metal is easy to understand. The entire state is reduced to a single gesture: draw, release, penetrate. The message travels faster than an explanation of imperial logistics ever could. There is also an element of competition within the elite. Amenhotep II's accomplishments establish distance between the ruler and even the best trained men around him. Court society thrives on rank, and royal exceptionalism prevents military prestige from becoming an alternative source of authority. Generals may command armies, but the king is represented as the greatest warrior. Charioteers may master horses, but the king surpasses them. Archers may train for years, but only the king pierces copper. The hierarchy remains intact because excellence itself is claimed by the throne. The image appears persuasive enough to survive far beyond the reign. Museums today preserve objects and inscriptions that continue to repeat this identity, even while modern scholarship treats the claims cautiously. A decorated box, a statue, a stela, or a fragmentary text can carry the same old message across more than 3,000 years. This was a ruler who wanted strength to be remembered before policy, force before compromise, and physical command before doubt. Yet the man behind the image remains elusive. His mummy survives, but muscle does not preserve reputation. His bones can confirm age, injury, and physical existence, but they cannot verify every feat. No examination can show whether he truly drew the heaviest bow in Egypt, or whether copper targets yielded exactly as the texts claim. The evidence remains incomplete because propaganda records impression, not measurement. What can be said with greater confidence is that Amenhotep II understood the political value of embodiment. He made kingship visible through the disciplined male body. His strength was not presented as a private gift, but as a public guarantee. Egypt would remain secure because its king could not be exhausted. Its enemies would remain afraid because no barrier could stop his arrows. Its officials would remain loyal because the ruler stood above even the strongest among them. The danger of such an image is that it creates its own demands. Once a king has been described as invincible, every rebellion becomes a challenge not only to his territory, but to the truth of his identity. He cannot respond weakly without damaging the myth. He must act in ways that match the body carved on stone. The impossible athlete must therefore become the irresistible conqueror, and the first serious test is already forming beyond Egypt's northern frontier. Beyond the Sinai, the myth of the invincible king meets a landscape that does not care about inscriptions. The Northern Empire is a mosaic of city-states, river crossings, mountain corridors, agricultural plains, fortified settlements, and local dynasties whose loyalty to Egypt is often practical rather than permanent. They send tribute because Egyptian armies have made refusal dangerous. They offer hostages, gifts, horses, metals, and finely worked goods because obedience buys time. But beneath the formal language of submission, every ruler watches the balance of power. The death of Thutmose III disturbs that balance. News of his passing moves along trade roads and diplomatic routes, carried by messengers, merchants, soldiers, and rumour. In distant courts, the transition may sound less like continuity than opportunity. The king who campaigned repeatedly across the region is gone. His son possesses a formidable reputation, but reputation has not yet been tested against rebellion. For local rulers already burdened by tribute and Egyptian interference, the question is not whether Amenhotep II can shoot through copper, it is whether he will bring an army north. Egyptian control in Syria Palace is impressive but uneven. Some cities are closely tied to the pharaoh through officials, garrisons, diplomatic obligations, or generations of submission. Others lie farther from direct supervision. Local kings retain their palaces, elites, armed followers, and rivalries. They may bow to Egypt while fighting one another, and they may appeal to foreign powers when circumstances change. Political allegiance is not a fixed identity. It is a survival strategy. Farther north and east stands Mitanni, a powerful kingdom whose interests overlap with Egypt's in Syria. Mitanni's rulers seek influence over the same cities, routes, and regional courts that Egypt claims. The struggle is not always a simple war between two centralized states. Much of it unfolds through alliances, shifting loyalties, local rebellions, displays of force, and competition over who can make distant rulers obey. A A city may submit to Egypt when Egyptian chariots are nearby and lean toward Mitanni when they depart. This fragile system helps explain why royal succession can trigger unrest. A ruler who delays tribute may be testing Egyptian response. Several neighbouring rulers acting together may believe collective resistance offers protection. A rebellion can begin with calculation rather than passion, a withheld payment, a closed gate, a messenger ignored, or an alliance renewed in secret. By the time the pharaoh receives the report, the act has already become an assault on imperial prestige. The surviving Egyptian records describe such unrest in the language of disorder. Foreign rulers are rebellious, hostile, fallen, or ignorant of the king's strength. Their political motives vanish. The texts do not explain their complaints or preserve their diplomatic arguments. They rarely admit that Egyptian demands may have been heavy, that local rivalries complicated loyalty, or that resistance could appear rational from within a threatened city. Official inscriptions turn a complicated regional crisis into a moral drama. The pharaoh represents order, and those who oppose him represent chaos. That framing prepares Egypt for punishment. If rebellion is treated as ordinary politics, negotiation remains possible. If it is treated as an attack on cosmic order, force becomes sacred correction. Amenhotep II's court has already spent years constructing him as the ruler uniquely suited to deliver that correction. The northern unrest gives the image a practical target. Reports would have reached Egypt through administrative channels linking the Levant to the Nile Valley. Egyptian representatives, loyal local rulers, military officers, and messengers all contribute fragments of information. Some reports may exaggerate danger to obtain support. Others may minimize failure to protect careers. Intelligence in an ancient empire is rarely complete. Amenhotep II must decide how serious the threat is, how far it has spread, and whether delay will encourage further resistance. The decision to campaign is therefore not simply an expression of anger. It is a calculation about credibility. If the new king allows rebellion to stand, even a limited uprising can become a story repeated across the empire. One city's survival may inspire another. Tribute may arrive late, then shrink, then stop. Egyptian allies may hedge their loyalties. The appearance of hesitation could prove more damaging than the original revolt. Yet marching north carries risks of its own. The route from Egypt into the Levant crosses harsh terrain where water, food, fodder, and timing matter. An army that moves too slowly gives enemies time to fortify. One that advances too quickly can outrun supplies. Chariot units require smooth enough ground to remain effective, while infantry, archers, baggage carriers, and support personnel must move in coordination. Heat, thirst, injured animals, damaged wheels, and disease can weaken a force before battle begins. Amenhotep II's personal image now becomes part of military preparation. He is expected to lead not merely as administrator, but as warrior. Royal inscriptions will later place him at the centre of action, often alone or nearly alone, surrounded by enemies and protected by divine favour. Real campaigning is far less solitary. Commanders debate routes, scouts gather information, scribes record supplies, engineers manage crossings, and officers maintain order among thousands of men. Still, the king's presence matters. Soldiers can see the ruler whose strength has been praised across Egypt, while foreign observers understand that the new pharaoh has come in person. The unrest also gives Amenhotep II a chance to separate himself from his father. He cannot equal decades of conquest in the first years of his reign, but he can demonstrate speed and severity. Thutmose III's reputation rests partly on persistence, the repeated return of Egyptian armies until resistance becomes exhausting. Amenhotep II can build a different image, the young king who responds immediately, strikes hard, and leaves unforgettable warnings behind. What survives in the record suggests that intimidation is already becoming as important as territorial gain. Egypt does not need to occupy every rebellious town permanently if rulers can be convinced that disobedience will bring ruin, public punishment, captive processions, confiscated goods, and triumphant inscriptions all extend the impact of a campaign beyond those who directly witness it. Violence becomes communication. This communication is directed at several audiences at once. Local rulers in the north are meant to fear what will happen if they resist. Egyptian officials are meant to admire the king's decisiveness. Soldiers are meant to trust his leadership. Priests are meant to see divine order restored. Future generations are meant to encounter the rebellion only as another proof that Amenhotep II was victorious. The rebels themselves remain almost voiceless. Their names may appear only when defeated. Their reasons are filtered through hostile records. Some may have sought independence. Some may have believed Mitanni would support them. Others may simply have misjudged the speed of Egypt's response. No single explanation fully accounts for the unrest across such a diverse region, and the evidence does not allow a clean reconstruction of every alliance. What is clearer is the danger the moment presents. Amenhotep II's authority has been constructed in temples, training grounds, and royal texts. Now it must travel beyond them. The arrow that pierced copper has become a promise, and the northern cities are testing whether the promise is real. Egypt begins to mobilize. Storehouses release grain, weapons are inspected, horses are harnessed and teams prepared. Orders pass from the palace through the military hierarchy. Boats, roads, and desert crossings become parts of a single movement toward the frontier. The young king who inherited an empire is preparing to prove that he can still command it. The army moves out of Egypt beneath a king who has been trained to appear invulnerable. But the road north is governed by less glamorous forces. Water determines pace, grain determines endurance, horses determine speed, and horses are fragile instruments compared with the confidence carved on temple walls. Their hooves split, harnesses fail, wheels crack, and fodder disappears quickly when hundreds of teams move through the same country. Amenhotep II's first major northern campaign is therefore not a single heroic charge. It is a long act of organization, extending from Nile storehouses to desert wells, and from Egyptian fortresses in the eastern delta to the contested cities of Syria. The army likely passes through the established coastal corridor linking Egypt with southern Canaan. Fortified stations and loyal settlements make the route possible, offering water, storage, intelligence, and places to reorganize. Infantry marches beside chariot units and baggage trains. Archers carry bows, arrows, spare strings, and equipment that must be protected from heat and moisture. Scribes record distributions, captures, and perhaps the performance of officers. Translators and local guides help the army understand terrain that royal inscriptions later reduce to a sequence of victories. The king's presence changes the meaning of the expedition. This is not merely a force sent to restore order in his name. Amenhotep II travels as the central symbol of retaliation. His youth and athletic reputation, so carefully shaped in Egypt, now become part of the campaign's psychological weight. Cities along the route hear that the son of Thutmose III is approaching with chariots, troops, and the authority of Amun behind him. Some rulers submit before battle, others delay, hoping distance, fortifications, or alliances will protect them. The surviving accounts are triumphal and selective. They describe rapid movement, defeated enemies, captured rulers, horses, chariots, weapons, livestock, and human prisoners. They give the impression that resistance disintegrates wherever the king appears, yet royal campaign records are not field diaries. They are constructed after the event to present confusion as control and costly effort as effortless domination. Defeats disappear, negotiations shrink into submission, and local cooperation is reframed as fear. Even successful campaigns contain delays, uncertainty, and compromises that monuments have no reason to preserve. Amenhotep II advances through a region already shaped by his father's wars. Megiddo and the routes through northern Canaan remain crucial, because they control access between the coastal plain, inland valleys, and the territories farther north. Beyond them lie increasingly complicated political landscapes, towns with strong walls, rulers tied to Egypt by old obligations, and others leaning toward Mitanni. The farther the army travels from the Nile, the more Egyptian power depends on momentum. One account presents the king pushing toward the Orontes region and into northern territories associated with Ni and Taxi. These names carry more than geographical meaning. They mark the outer zone where Egyptian ambition meets rival influence and where loyalty can shift quickly. Reaching such areas allows Amenhotep II to claim that he has matched the reach of the previous reign. Holding them permanently is a different matter. The distinction between reaching and controlling is easy to lose in royal language. An army can enter a district, defeat an opposing force, seize captives, and accept tribute without creating lasting administration. Local rulers may bow while Egyptian troops are present and return to independent calculation once they depart. A city that opens its gates is not necessarily loyal. It may simply be surviving the season. Egyptian inscriptions treat submission as permanent because the king's victory must appear permanent. But the need for repeated campaigns reveals a more unstable reality. Amenhotep II is described as taking an active role in combat, sometimes with the isolation and grandeur familiar from royal battle imagery. The king encounters enemies, attacks, captures, and dominates through his own force. Such descriptions continue the propaganda of the training ground. The archer who pierced copper now pierces rebellion. The charioteer who controlled horses in practice now controls the northern world in war. Real command would have been more complex. The king may have led from the chariot and participated visibly in dangerous moments, but he also depended on experienced officers, scouts, messengers, and regional intelligence. His army had to coordinate across uneven ground, protect supply lines, and decide when pursuit would expose troops to ambush. The heroic king of the inscription compresses an entire military institution into one body, just as his athletic legends had done before. Captures are especially important to the campaign's presentation. Horses and chariots demonstrate the defeat of elite enemy forces. Weapons show that resistance has been disarmed. Livestock and goods reward the army and enrich the state. Human captives provide labor, political leverage, and visible proof of victory. High-ranking prisoners carry even greater value because they embody the authority of the cities and districts that challenged Egypt. The numbers recorded in Egyptian victory texts must be approached cautiously. Ancient rulers frequently used totals to communicate abundance and completeness, rather than modern statistical precision. Lists of prisoners and spoils may reflect genuine administrative counting, rhetorical enlargement, or a mixture of both. The evidence remains incomplete, and scholars still debate how closely particular figures correspond to events on the ground. What survives with greater clarity is the obsession with enumeration. The court wants victory to be measurable. Numbers turn violence into accounting. A defeated region becomes so many captives, so many horses, so many chariots, so many weapons, and so many units of tribute. The individual experiences of the conquered vanish into categories. This transformation serves both bureaucracy and propaganda. Officials can distribute resources, while monumental texts can display the scale of royal success without dwelling on the disorder from which those resources came. Amenhotep II's campaign also operates as a moving demonstration of judgment. Towns that submit may be spared greater destruction and drawn back into Egypt's network. Those that resist risk siege, seizure, and exemplary punishment. The king does not need to destroy every settlement. He needs each settlement to understand the contrast between obedience and rebellion. This selective severity is more useful than uncontrolled devastation. Egypt depends on the territories it dominates. Productive towns provide tribute, supplies, strategic access, and political intermediaries. A ruined landscape cannot easily support an empire. The campaign must therefore create fear without eliminating the system that fear is meant to govern. Violence is applied not only to remove enemies, but to shape future decisions. The inscriptions insist that Amenhotep II succeeds. He returns with captives and wealth, and his image as the warrior heir of Thutmose III hardens into official memory. Rebellion has given him the opportunity he needed, a stage large enough to prove that the new reign is not weak. Egypt can proclaim that the northern lands have seen his strength and learned obedience. Yet the campaign's very necessity reveals the limits of imperial power. If Egyptian authority were truly absolute, no expedition would have been required. If one victory solved the region permanently, later campaigns would be unnecessary. The army can cross the frontier and force submission, but it cannot freeze political life. Local rulers continue to calculate. Mitanni remains influential. Geography continues to favor distance, delay, and resistance. Amenhotep II nevertheless understands how to turn a temporary military result into a permanent political image. The campaign is carved as proof that his accession has not weakened Egypt. The athletic prince has become the conquering king. His father's empire has been tested, and the son has answered with speed, organization, and force. But simple victory is not enough for the reputation Amenhotep II is building. Captives can be counted, tribute displayed, and rebellious towns named. Yet such records may fade into the familiar language of royal conquest. To make this campaign unforgettable, the king needs a warning stronger than numbers. Among those taken in the north are men whose fate will carry the message far beyond the battlefield. Among the prisoners taken during Amenhotep II's northern campaign are 7 men whose importance exceeds their number. Egyptian records identify them with a term often translated as princes, rulers, or chiefs. It does not necessarily mean that they are young royal sons in the modern sense. They are adult political leaders associated with rebellious territories, men whose authority makes them more valuable than ordinary captives and far more useful as symbols. Their capture gives Amenhotep II an opportunity to transform a military victory into something designed to travel through memory. The royal account claims that the king kills all 7 personally. This detail fits the identity built around him since youth. The arm that draws the unmatched bow now carries out judgment without assistance. Officers, guards, and executioners disappear from the story. Just as craftsmen and trainers disappeared from the tales of his athletic feats. Once again, the machinery of the state is concentrated into the body of one man. Pharaoh conquers, captures, judges, and punishes. Whether Amenhotep II literally carried out every act himself cannot be established. Royal inscriptions routinely shape events to place the king at their centre, and the evidence remains incomplete. It is entirely possible that the captives were executed under his authority, while the text converted command into direct personal action. It is also possible that he participated in some ritualized form of punishment intended to demonstrate royal supremacy. The surviving account does not allow modern certainty, but its purpose is unmistakable. The king wants responsibility attached to his own name. Death alone is not the end of the message. The bodies displayed on the front of the royal vessel as the army travels back toward Egypt. The procession turns the Nile into a moving corridor of intimidation. Soldiers, officials, temple personnel, boatmen, and communities along the route can see the evidence of what happens to rulers who challenge Egyptian power. The defeated men are no longer treated as political actors. They have been transformed into objects in a royal performance. The ship itself carries deep meaning. Boats are essential to Egyptian life, administration, religion, and kingship. They transport grain, stone, troops, officials, gods' images, and royal bodies. Sacred barks carry deities during festivals, while ceremonial vessels link the pharaoh to divine movement across the world. By fastening the defeated rulers to the royal vessel, Amenhotep II places rebellion beneath the motion of kingship. The living king travels in triumph, while those who resisted him are reduced to cargo and warning. When the procession reaches Thebes, 6 of the bodies are displayed publicly. The location matters. Thebes is not merely a capital or royal residence. It is the city of Amun, the divine patron whose favour is said to guide Egyptian conquest. The prisoner's fate is therefore presented not as private vengeance, but as a victory offered before the gods. Violence enters sacred geography and is made to appear compatible with cosmic order. This is the central logic of Amenhotep II's political theatre. He does not punish only to remove opponents. He punishes so that different audiences will interpret the result in carefully directed ways. Egyptian troops are shown that resistance ends in humiliation. Court officials see a young king acting decisively. Priests receive evidence that Amun's chosen ruler has restored order. Foreign envoys carry the story back to their own courts. The spectacle multiplies the effect of the campaign long after the army has returned. The 7th body is reserved for an even more deliberate purpose. It is sent south into Nubia and displayed at Napata, far from the northern lands where the rebellion occurred. This is one of the most revealing details in the account. The man had not been captured in Nubia, and his punishment is not primarily intended for the people who knew him. He becomes a transported message, removed from his own political world and placed before an entirely different frontier population. The choice demonstrates that Amenhotep II thinks imperially. A rebellion in Syria can be used to frighten Kush. A northern ruler can become a warning in the south. Geography does not limit the meaning of punishment, because the state can move symbols across its territories. In modern terms, the execution is not only an event, it is a communication strategy. Napata lies within a region essential to Egyptian power. Nubia supplies gold, labour, livestock, luxury goods, and access to routes extending farther into Africa. It also contains communities with their own political traditions and memories of resistance. Egypt governs the south through forts, temples, officials, military force, and the office of the Viceroy of Kush. Yet distance remains a challenge. A royal order issued in Egypt must travel upriver through a long corridor where local knowledge and cooperation matter. Displaying one of the northern rulers at Napata tells southern audiences that distance offers no safety. The pharaoh who crosses into Syria can also reach deep into Nubia. The message does not depend on the captive's identity being familiar. His foreignness may even strengthen it. He represents any ruler who imagines that Egyptian authority can be tested. Such methods belong to what can reasonably be described as psychological warfare. The objective is to influence behavior before another battle becomes necessary. If local leaders believe rebellion will result not merely in defeat, but in public degradation, they may choose submission without forcing Egypt to mobilize another expensive campaign. Fear becomes a substitute for permanent military presence. This does not mean that Amenhotep II invents terror as a tool of government. Earlier Egyptian kings had long portrayed themselves striking bound enemies, trampling foreign lands, and restoring order through force. The image of the ruler smiting an opponent reaches back into the earliest phases of Egyptian kingship. What distinguishes Amenhotep II is the intensity with which his personal strength, direct punishment, and transported warnings are woven together. The athletic legend and the imperial spectacle reinforce one another. Nor should the surviving inscription be treated like an impartial record from the battlefield. Its language is designed to celebrate the king, and every detail serves that purpose. The rebellious leaders have no voices. Their names, motives, and circumstances are largely lost behind the categories imposed by Egypt. We do not know whether they acted together, whether they were captured in the same place, or whether the narrative compresses several events into one dramatic sequence. Scholars still debate the precise chronology of Amenhotep II's early campaigns, and the texts themselves sometimes create confusion by labelling expeditions in ways that do not fit easily into a single order. Yet dismissing the account as mere exaggeration would miss its historical value. Even propaganda must choose images that make sense within the political culture producing it. The court believed that displaying defeated rulers would strengthen the king's authority. It believed that audiences in Thebes and Napata should see the same lesson. It believed that the pharaoh's reputation benefited from presenting him as personally responsible for extreme punishment. This is why the phrase blood-soaked throne can capture something real while still requiring caution. There is no scholarly measurement proving Amenhotep II to be Egypt's bloodiest ruler. Other pharaohs fought longer wars, recorded enormous captures, destroyed cities, and celebrated severe punishments. The title belongs to dramatic storytelling, not a formal historical ranking. What the evidence supports more firmly is that Amenhotep II used highly visible violence as a political language. His campaign does not end when the fighting stops. It continues in the sight of the bodies on the royal vessel, in the public display at Thebes, in the solitary warning sent south, and in the inscription that preserves the spectacle for later generations. The 7 rulers are made to serve Egypt one final time not as allies, taxpayers, or captives, but as signs. Amenhotep II has answered the doubts surrounding his accession with something intended to be unforgettable. He is no longer simply the son of Thutmose III or the prince who shoots through copper. He is now the king who turns defeated enemies into messages and sends those messages to opposite ends of the empire. The warning sent to Napata does not arrive in an empty landscape. Nubia is already woven deeply into Egypt's imperial system, yet it is never reduced to a passive extension of the Nile Valley. South of Egypt, the river narrows between cliffs, bends through cataracts, opens into fertile pockets, and passes communities whose histories long predate the authority of the 18th dynasty. Gold, cattle, ivory, ebony, stone, animal products, and access to routes farther into Africa make the region indispensable. That importance also makes it dangerous. Egypt cannot afford to lose the south, and Amenhotep II cannot allow southern rulers to mistake distance for freedom. Egyptian control rests on layers rather than a single occupation. Forts guard strategic points. Temples project the presence of Egyptian gods and kings. Officials supervise taxation, labor, trade, transport, and military security. Garrisons watch the river. Local elites may be absorbed into the system, rewarded for cooperation, or displaced when they resist. Egyptian culture spreads through administration and religion, but it does not erase the political memory of Kush. Beneath the official image of unquestioned domination lies a frontier that requires constant attention. At the center of this structure stands the Viceroy of Kush, one of the most important offices in the New Kingdom. The title gives a single official extraordinary responsibility over Egypt's southern territories. He acts in the Pharaoh's name, supervises local administration, directs resources northward, coordinates military matters, and serves as the visible face of royal authority, where the king himself is usually absent. Under Amenhotep II, the viceroy Usersetet occupies this demanding position. A surviving stela associated with Usersetet preserves a royal communication from Amenhotep II and opens a rare window into how the king speaks to his representative in the south. The text is not merely administrative. It carries the tone of a ruler who expects obedience to be sustained through vigilance, suspicion, and intimidation. Royal command travels upriver not as a polite suggestion but as an extension of the pharaoh's will. The language is revealing because it exposes the anxiety beneath imperial confidence. Amenhotep II presents himself as absolute, yet his instructions acknowledge that foreign rulers, local leaders, and subordinate officials must be watched carefully. Loyalty is not assumed. It has to be tested, reinforced, and sometimes frightened into existence. The king warns against trusting those who appear submissive while hiding other intentions. In an empire built from conquest, even peaceful behavior can be interpreted as temporary strategy. This suspicion is not entirely irrational. Local leaders in Nubia possess knowledge that Egyptian officials often lack. They understand routes, communities, seasonal conditions, regional alliances, and the movement of goods. Egypt depends on them even while fearing their independence. The imperial administration therefore faces a permanent contradiction. It must use local power without allowing that power to become too secure. Usersetet stands inside this contradiction. To the Egyptian court, he must appear loyal, effective, and alert. To the people he governs, he must represent authority strongly enough to discourage resistance, but flexibly enough to keep the region productive. Excessive violence could disrupt labor, trade, and taxation. Excessive accommodation could look like weakness. His position requires him to translate royal threats into practical control. The stela also reveals something about Amenhotep II's governing style. His reputation is often built around physical feats and battlefield punishment, but imperial rule depends just as much on written instructions. The king's violence is not only displayed on monuments, it is embedded in administration. A threat carried by a messenger can reach farther than a chariot. A decree can make distant officials act without the king ever leaving Egypt. This is where psychological power becomes especially efficient. Permanent occupation across every mile of Nubia would be costly and unnecessary. Egypt instead relies on strategic centers, local cooperation, religious symbolism, and the belief that disobedience will eventually bring punishment. The seventh body sent from the northern campaign strengthens that belief, because it demonstrates that the king connects distant frontiers in his own mind. What happens in Syria is relevant at Napata. What happens in Nubia will be known at Thebes. The display also turns the empire into a single theatre. Northern and southern subjects are made part of the same performance, even though they face different political conditions. The message is simple enough to cross languages and cultures. Amenhotep II remembers rebellion, and he is willing to move its consequences across great distances. Yet the reality of Egyptian rule in Nubia cannot be reduced to fear. Temples receive offerings, settlements grow around administrative centres. Egyptian and Nubian traditions interact through marriage, trade, craftsmanship, burial customs, language, and service to the state. Some Nubian elites benefit from the imperial system and may send their sons to be educated in Egyptian court culture, later returning as intermediaries loyal to the pharaoh. Such policies are often described as methods of integration, though the surviving evidence does not reveal how willingly every family participated. Gold remains the most powerful material reason for Egyptian control. The new kingdom's monumental wealth depends heavily on southern mines and the labour networks that support them. Gold pays for diplomacy, temple decoration, royal gifts, elite rewards, and the visual splendour through which Egypt represents itself to the wider world. A king who loses reliable access to Nubian gold loses more than revenue. He loses part of the material foundation of divine kingship. The road from mine to temple is long, or has to be extracted, processed, transported, guarded, recorded, and distributed. Workers need food and water in difficult environments. Animals, boats, tools, and officials all become part of the chain. Amenhotep II's power in the south therefore depends on ordinary routines as much as spectacular warnings. The body at Napata attracts attention, but the empire survives through ledgers, storage rooms, river transport, and officials who continue working after the crowd disperses. This contrast is essential. Terror is memorable, but administration is durable. Amenhotep II needs both. Fear may stop a local ruler from rebelling, while bureaucracy ensures that gold still moves north the following month. A displayed enemy can dramatize authority, but only a functioning system can turn authority into wealth. The religious landscape helps bind these elements together. Egyptian temples in Nubia do more than serve worship. They mark territory and establish a sacred map in which the pharaoh appears as the chosen ruler of lands far beyond Egypt proper. Local gods may be identified with Egyptian deities, and royal offerings present conquest as divine order. Once again, political domination is wrapped in theology. The falcon image associated with kingship gains particular force here. From the court's perspective, the pharaoh sees the entire empire from above, from the northern cities to the southern cataracts. He does not need to stand physically in every fortress, because his authority is imagined as all-seeing. Usasatet acts as his eyes and hands, while monuments and decrees remind the population that the king's reach extends beyond the horizon. But no ruler truly sees everything. Reports arrive late, officials distort information, local disputes are misunderstood, successes are exaggerated and failures concealed. The evidence remains incomplete, and the confident tone of a royal inscription should not be mistaken for complete control. The need for repeated warning suggests that obedience could never be taken for granted. Amenhotep II's southern policy therefore reveals both the strength and insecurity of his reign. He possesses an administration capable of carrying commands hundreds of miles, extracting wealth, maintaining temples, and projecting royal identity deep into Nubia. Yet he also relies on threats so severe that a dead ruler captured in the north is sent south as proof of consequence. The Nile connects the empire, but it also exposes its length. Every bend carries messages, goods, rumours, and opportunities for resistance. Amenhotep II answers that vulnerability by making fear travel with the river. His authority flows south through decrees, officials, temples, and one carefully chosen spectacle of death, each reinforcing the same claim: the pharaoh may be far away, but punishment is not. Fear works best when it is witnessed. Amenhotep II's punishments are not hidden in palace courtyards or erased after the condemned are gone. They are displayed, recorded, transported, and placed inside the sacred language of kingship. The bodies on the royal vessel, the warning sent to Napata, the carved images of bound enemies, and the repeated claims of unmatched strength all belong to the same political system. Violence is not treated as an unfortunate private necessity. It becomes public theatre, carefully arranged so that every audience understands who stands above whom. This theatre is much older than Amenhotep II. From the beginnings of Egyptian kingship, rulers are shown striking enemies beneath a raised weapon. The poses change little across centuries. The king towers over his opponents. Their bodies are compressed, tangled, or held together by the hair. The ruler's arm is lifted at the decisive moment before impact, freezing violence into an eternal promise. The blow may never visibly land, because the image does not describe one execution. It declares the permanent capacity to punish. In Egyptian political thought, the pharaoh preserves Mut, the ideal of order, balance, justice, proper hierarchy, and cosmic stability. Against it stands disorder, often expressed through rebellion, foreignness, chaos, or the forces threatening the created world. This does not mean every Egyptian regarded every foreign person as inherently chaotic, nor that daily relations across borders were defined only by hostility. Diplomacy, trade, intermarriage, migration, and cultural exchange were constant features of the ancient Near East. Royal ideology simplifies that complicated reality. It transforms political enemies into symbols of disorder so that defeating them appears necessary for the universe itself. Once rebellion is placed in that category, punishment acquires sacred meaning. The king does not merely defend taxes, routes, garrisons, and prestige. He restores the proper arrangement of the world. Resistance becomes more than a policy disagreement. It becomes an offence against divine order. This is why Amenhotep II can appear kneeling before Amun in one object and presiding over extreme punishment in another without contradiction. Piety and violence support one another. The king submits to the god, then claims the right to make others submit to him. The temples help preserve this logic. Victory texts are placed in sacred settings where military achievement becomes an offering. Captives, tribute, and foreign goods enrich the god's estates. Conquest expands temple wealth, and temple ritual returns divine legitimacy to the conqueror. The relationship is circular and highly effective. Amun grants victory, the king rewards Amun, the monument records both. Future campaigns begin under the authority of the same sacred partnership. Amenhotep II's athletic propaganda fits smoothly into this system because his body is presented as divinely perfected. When he controls horses, outlasts rowers, or pierces copper, the court is not merely praising exercise. It is showing that the gods have equipped Egypt's ruler for the work of maintaining order. His physical superiority becomes evidence that the hierarchy around him is correct. If no one can equal his strength, then no one should equal his authority. This is one reason royal violence is so often exaggerated in scale. The king must appear alone against many enemies because divine order is imagined as concentrated in him. Soldiers may fill the battlefield in reality, but the image reduces them. Generals vanish, allied forces disappear. Logistics, uncertainty, and negotiation are erased. Pharaoh stands by himself because the purpose is not to document battle. It is to demonstrate hierarchy. Humiliation is as important as death within this theatre. A defeated ruler who remains dignified might still command sympathy or loyalty. A ruler stripped of symbols, bound, displayed, and removed from his own land is politically dismantled. His authority is shown to have depended on Egyptian tolerance. Once that tolerance ends, he becomes powerless even over his own body. The 7 northern leaders suffer this transformation. Whatever titles, courts, followers, or local legitimacy they once possessed are absent from Amenhotep II's account. They enter the record only at the moment of defeat. Their earlier lives do not matter to the monument. Their final usefulness lies in showing that foreign authority collapses when placed beside the pharaoh. The same process occurs in tribute scenes, though with less overt violence. Foreign delegations bring goods while bending or kneeling before the king. Their clothing, hairstyles, objects, and physical features distinguish them, creating a visual map of the world arranged around Egypt. These scenes may record real diplomatic exchanges, but they are structured to eliminate equality. A gift offered in negotiation becomes tribute. A foreign envoy becomes a subject. A complicated relationship becomes submission. Royal theatre therefore reshapes reality rather than simply inventing it. Amenhotep II may genuinely win battles, receive tribute, execute captives, and command distant officials. The inscriptions then strip away everything that makes those events ambiguous. Cost becomes effortless victory. Bargaining becomes obedience. Resistance becomes madness. Punishment becomes justice. The audience is broader than the population standing before a monument. Images and stories travel through officials, soldiers, craftsmen, diplomats, and visitors. A stela erected after a campaign can be copied elsewhere, as happened with texts associated with Amenhotep II's victories. Repetition creates consistency. The same king appears invincible in Thebes, in Nubia, and at strategic sites along the empire. Distance no longer weakens the message because monuments reproduce his presence. Literacy is not required for the basic meaning to be understood. Scribes and priests may read the full inscription, but scale, posture, captives, weapons, and divine symbols communicate visually. The king is large, the enemies are small. The king stands, the enemies kneel or fall. The gods approve. Even without knowing every word, an observer can grasp the intended order. The performance also disciplines Egyptian elites. A general, governor, or viceroy viewing the king's victories sees more than foreign punishment. He sees a reminder that all authority flows downward from the throne. Officials may control armies, provinces, mines, and temple estates, but their power is represented as delegated. The pharaoh remains the only figure permitted to appear truly sovereign. There is a practical reason for this insistence. The Egyptian state depends on powerful men. Viceroys govern distant regions. Generals command troops. High priests control institutions of immense wealth. Provincial officials manage resources the court cannot supervise directly. The king needs their competence, but must prevent competence from becoming independence. Royal theatre keeps them symbolically subordinate even when their real influence is considerable. Public violence also protects the king from appearing ordinary. A ruler who governs mainly through meetings, decrees, tax adjustments, and appointments might be effective, but such work does not distinguish him dramatically from senior officials. By presenting himself as the personal destroyer of rebellion, Amenhotep II claims a role no administrator can imitate. Only the king can turn punishment into sacred restoration. Yet the system contains a danger. The more authority depends on spectacle, the more each new challenge demands another convincing performance. A reputation for severity can prevent rebellion, but once rebellion occurs, the ruler must respond in a way that preserves the reputation. Mercy may be politically useful, yet it risks appearing inconsistent. Negotiation may save resources, yet it is difficult to carve as triumph. The king becomes trapped by the image designed to protect him. This may help explain the intensity of Amenhotep II's early reign. He inherits an empire after an exceptional conqueror and presents himself as a warrior of impossible strength. When northern rulers resist, a moderate response would weaken both claims at once. His punishments therefore answer not only the rebels but the expectations created by his own propaganda. No single explanation fully accounts for every harsh act recorded under Amenhotep II. Personal temperament, military calculation, inherited ideology, court politics, and the conventions of royal writing all play a role. It would be too simple to reduce everything to cruelty, just as it would be too forgiving to dismiss the violence as empty symbolism. The executions were symbols because they were real enough to terrify. That combination is what gives Amenhotep II's reign its dark power. He understands that violence can end a life, but spectacle can govern those who remain. A body disappears, a warning survives, a campaign concludes. Its image continues to march across temple walls, border stele, royal objects, and memory, making the throne appear protected not only by armies, but by the entire sacred order of Egypt. Behind every image of Amenhotep II standing alone over defeated enemies is a crowd the monument refuses to show. The empire does not move because one man draws a bow. It moves because scribes calculate grain, boat crews steer against the current, farmers produce surplus, craftsmen repair weapons, stable workers tend horses, miners extract metal, priests sanctify victory, and officials transform conquest into taxes. The king's body may dominate the wall, but the state survives through thousands of bodies working beyond the frame. The first requirement is food. An army marching into Syria cannot live on royal confidence. Grain has to be collected, stored, measured, transported, ground, and baked. Beer, onions, dried foods, oil, and other staples must be distributed in quantities large enough to sustain men moving through heat and dust. Officers receive rations according to rank. Animals consume their own supplies, often in volumes that make the human provisions seem modest. A chariot force can move quickly only if fodder has already been secured along the route. Much of this begins with taxation in the Nile Valley. Egyptian agriculture depends on the annual flood, but the harvest is not simply gathered and consumed locally. Scribes assess fields, record yields, calculate obligations, and direct part of the surplus into state and temple storehouses. Those measurements are never perfectly neutral. A low flood can reduce production. Local officials may hide shortages or exaggerate compliance. Farmers may resist assessments they consider impossible. The evidence remains incomplete, but administrative documents from the wider New Kingdom world reveal how closely royal power is tied to counting. Numbers convert the landscape into resources. Fields become grain quotas, herds become livestock totals, workers become labor assignments, gold becomes weight, captives become categories. The same bureaucratic instinct visible in Amenhotep II's victory lists also governs the quieter machinery behind them. Conquest is measured because the state must decide what can be redistributed, offered, stored, or sent elsewhere. Temples occupy a central place in this system. The wealth granted to Amun after military success does not vanish into purely ceremonial use. Temple estates control land, workshops, herds, storage facilities, boats, and large groups of personnel. Priests perform rituals, but temple institutions also produce and manage resources. When Amenhotep II rewards Amun, he strengthens an organization capable of supporting royal authority, while also increasing its own influence. This partnership is useful but delicate. The king requires divine legitimacy. The priesthood benefits from royal generosity. Each victory can bring land, captives, precious materials, and prestige into the temple economy. Yet any institution that accumulates wealth also accumulates power. Amenhotep II stands above the priesthood in official ideology. But practical government depends on cooperation with men whose administrative networks may outlast individual rulers. The same is true of the army. Royal inscriptions make soldiers appear almost unnecessary, but Amenhotep II's campaigns require infantry, archers, chariot crews, scouts, guards, officers, medics, armourers, and transport workers. Some are professional troops. Others may be drawn into service through obligations linked to estates, institutions, or regional administration. Foreign soldiers and Nubian archers can also serve within Egyptian forces, complicating the clean division between Egypt and the lands its monuments portray as enemies. Military service offers danger but also opportunity. Successful campaigns produce booty, promotions, titles, land grants, captives, and access to the royal court. Officers who distinguish themselves can build family fortunes. Their tomb inscriptions may celebrate loyalty and achievement, creating smaller versions of the same self-presentation used by the pharaoh, yet even the most decorated commander remains dependent on royal favour. Amenhotep II's image as the supreme warrior ensures that no general can claim victory independently. The horses praised in royal texts demand an entire hidden profession. Grooms inspect hooves, clean wounds, prepare feed, maintain harnesses, and train teams to respond under noise and pressure. Chariot wheels require specialized woodworking. Leather components dry, stretch, and tear. Axles heat under friction. Bows lose tension. Arrow shafts bend. Metal edges dull. The elegant speed of elite warfare rests on constant repair. Craft production therefore becomes part of imperial strategy. Workshops attached to palaces, temples, and administrative centers turn raw materials into tools of rule. Wood from distant regions becomes chariot frames and bows. Copper and tin become bronze fittings and weapons. Leather becomes shields, quivers, harnesses, and protective equipment. Linen becomes clothing, bandages, sails, and wrappings. Every imported material celebrated as tribute enters a chain of skilled labor before it becomes useful. Some of that labor is performed by captives. Egyptian campaigns bring back large numbers of people who can be assigned to estates, workshops, temples, households, or agricultural projects. Royal records present them as part of the spoils, but behind the category are individuals removed from familiar communities and absorbed into an imperial economy. The sources rarely preserve their perspectives. What survives in the record suggests that captivity could lead to many different outcomes, from hard labor to eventual integration, depending on status, skill, location, and the needs of the state. The violence of conquest therefore continues after the battlefield. A prisoner displayed in triumph becomes a symbol, while many others disappear into work. They may cultivate land that supports Egyptian institutions, produce objects used in temples, or serve households whose wealth depends indirectly on war. The empire does not only defeat people, it reorganizes their labor. Officials make this reorganization possible. The court depends on men who can read, write, calculate, inspect, report, and command. Provincial administrators collect revenue, treasury officials supervise precious goods, overseers manage granaries and workshops. Viceroys carry royal authority into distant territories. Messengers move information between them. Each office creates opportunities for both competence and corruption. The pharaoh cannot personally inspect every storehouse or frontier station. He must rely on reports, seals, witnesses, and chains of responsibility. A dishonest official can divert goods. A frightened subordinate can conceal failure. A governor can present local resistance as greater than it is to request more troops, or smaller than it is to avoid blame. The confident simplicity of royal inscriptions rests on a government constantly struggling with incomplete information. This makes loyalty a practical resource. Amenhotep II rewards officials who appear reliable and surrounds the administration with ritual language emphasizing service to the king. Titles, honors, tomb privileges, and access to royal favor encourage men to bind their identities to the regime. Their careers become evidence that the system works. Their monuments praise the king because their own status depends on his remembered greatness. At the lowest visible level are laborers whose names rarely survive. They quarry stone for temples, drag blocks, dig foundations, maintain canals, load boats, carry supplies, and build the monuments that later conceal them. Skilled workers may live in organized communities and receive regular rations, while others perform temporary service imposed through taxation or institutional obligation. Conditions vary widely, and scholars still debate how labor was recruited for many projects. What is certain is that monumental kingship consumes enormous human effort. Even ritual depends on routine. Priests wash sacred images, change garments, burn incense, recite formulas, and present food offerings according to schedules that must continue regardless of war. Temple bakers, brewers, gardeners, cleaners, musicians, guards, and record keepers sustain the daily life of the gods. When Amenhotep II appears before Amun as victorious son, he enters a sacred system maintained by workers whose service is repeated every morning. The empire is therefore held together by repetition more than spectacle. Grain is measured again, horses are fed again, reports are copied again, offerings are prepared again, boats depart again. One campaign may dominate a stela, but thousands of ordinary actions determine whether its effects last. Amenhotep II's brilliance as a political image lies in making all this complexity disappear. The state's labor becomes his strength, the army's discipline becomes his courage, the treasury's wealth becomes his generosity, the priest's rituals become his divine favor, the official's decisions become his command, the suffering of captives becomes his victory. Yet the hidden world behind the monuments never stops pressing against the image. A shortage can delay an expedition, a failed harvest can weaken taxation, a damaged chariot can strand an officer, a dishonest report can mislead the court, an overburdened province can rebel. The pharaoh appears absolute only because the system beneath him works well enough to preserve the illusion. Amenhotep II rules not simply through terror, but through coordination. Fear may keep distant rulers obedient, while grain keeps soldiers moving and paperwork keeps tribute flowing. The blood on the throne is real, but so is the ink. One creates the spectacle of empire. The other allows it to continue after the spectators have gone home. The ink that keeps the empire moving also creates the greatest obstacle to understanding the man at its centre. Amenhotep II survives through records designed not to explain him, but to protect his authority. His inscriptions are abundant enough to shape a powerful image and selective enough to distort it. They tell us that he is strong, victorious, favoured by Amun, feared by enemies, and unmatched by ordinary men. They're far less interested in showing where plans failed, where resistance continued, where diplomacy replaced force, or where other people made decisions that mattered. This is not accidental. Royal inscriptions are instruments of rule. They're composed within institutions dependent on the king, carved by craftsmen serving temple and court, and placed where their message can endure. They do not ask whether Amenhotep II deserves criticism. They begin from the assumption that kingship is legitimate and then arrange events to prove it. The result is not pure fiction, but neither is it transparent history. One of the first things these records conceal is uncertainty. A campaign may involve poor intelligence, difficult terrain, unreliable allies, unexpected resistance, and competing advice. None of that belongs in the finished monument. The inscription presents the king as knowing what to do from the beginning. The army moves because he commands. The enemy falls because divine order demands it. Chance, hesitation, and debate disappear. The same process affects chronology. Amenhotep II's northern expeditions are described in texts that do not always align neatly with one another. Regnal years, place names, campaign labels, and sequences of events have generated long scholarly debate. Some accounts may refer to separate expeditions, others may summarize several actions or repeat earlier achievements in new settings. The evidence remains incomplete, and efforts to build a precise timeline often depend on interpreting texts that were never designed to function as modern campaign logs. Duplicated or closely related inscriptions create another problem. A victory text copied at more than one temple can appear to provide independent confirmation when it may simply reproduce the same official version. Repetition strengthens propaganda, but it does not automatically strengthen historical certainty. A claim carved at Karnak and repeated at Amada has wider geographical reach, yet both versions may still derive from a single courtly composition. Formulaic language complicates matters further. Egyptian royal texts draw on established phrases used across reigns. Enemies are crushed, foreign lands tremble, rulers fall beneath the king's feet, and gods grant victory. Such expressions communicate ideology more reliably than detail. When Amenhotep II is called a protecting wall for Egypt or a warrior without equal, the language reveals what kingship is supposed to look like. It does not provide a measured comparison with other rulers. Numbers are equally difficult. Lists of captives, horses, chariots, weapons, livestock, and tribute may include real administrative counting, but they also serve rhetorical purposes. Large totals display abundance and completeness. Rounded or repeated figures may be symbolic, conventional, or copied. Even precise-looking numbers should not be accepted automatically as exact. A scribe can make propaganda appear statistical without making it neutral. This does not mean the figures should be discarded. They may preserve genuine information about the scale and priorities of a campaign. Horses and chariots reveal the importance of elite warfare. Human captives reveal the economic consequences of conquest. Tribute lists show the materials Egypt valued. The challenge is to use the numbers as evidence without pretending they are modern audited records. The famous account of the 7 executed rulers demonstrates the same tension. It is specific enough to feel immediate 7 leaders are killed, 6 displayed at Thebes, 1 sent to Napata. The structure is memorable and politically coherent, yet the inscription does not tell us how the men were selected, whether they were captured together, what titles they actually held, or whether the king personally performed every act. This story may preserve a real sequence while still being shaped for dramatic effect. Royal silence can be as revealing as royal speech. Amenhotep II's texts do not preserve the voices of defeated rulers. They do not describe negotiations from the other side, grievances against Egyptian rule, or the reasons communities changed allegiance. Foreign resistance appears irrational because acknowledging its logic would weaken the moral clarity of conquest. The defeated are reduced to categories: rebels, enemies, chiefs, captives. The records also conceal the contribution of Egyptian subjects. Soldiers, officers, scouts, scribes, interpreters, local allies, and administrators are present only when their inclusion enhances the king. A commander may receive praise in his own tomb, but in royal narrative the pharaoh dominates. If an expedition succeeds through careful planning by experienced officers, the official version still transforms the result into personal royal power. The same erasure applies to women of the court. Queens, royal mothers, daughters, and female members of elite households participate in dynastic continuity, temple patronage, property networks, and court alliances. Yet Amenhotep II's martial image leaves little space for them. His mother helps anchor legitimacy, but the political role of a royal woman is harder to reconstruct because the monuments focus on the male body of conquest. Administrative archives would offer a different view, but survival is uneven. Papyrus decays, storage rooms burn, flood, or are cleared. Records considered temporary are discarded. Stone monuments endure more readily than daily paperwork, creating a built-in bias toward official display. The pharaoh survives in granite while many of the people who made his reign function vanish with ink and mud brick. Archaeology can correct some of these distortions, though never completely. Fortifications, settlement remains, imported objects, workshop debris, burial equipment, and material traces of exchange reveal a world more complicated than royal triumph. Glass fragments associated with KV 35, for example, connect Amenhotep II's age to specialized production and long-distance networks. They tell us nothing about battlefield glory, yet they preserve the technical and commercial world surrounding the court. Objects can also contradict the illusion of permanence. Statues are moved, damaged, reused, and reinscribed. An image that once represented Amenhotep II may later be altered for another king, including Ramesses II. Such appropriation reminds us that royal memory is not fixed. Later rulers do not merely inherit monuments, they reshape them, replace names, modify faces, and absorb earlier authority into their own image. Even the discovery of Amenhotep II's tomb changes the story preserved by his inscriptions. The warrior king who claimed complete command over foreign lands is found in a burial chamber that later becomes a refuge for other royal dead. Priests, robbers, restorers, and modern excavators all leave their mark on the evidence. The tomb is not a sealed message from one reign. It is a space altered by centuries of fear, rescue, disturbance, and interpretation. Modern scholarship must therefore read Amenhotep II against the grain. Historians compare inscriptions, study language, examine archaeological context, reconstruct roots, evaluate royal conventions, and look for contradictions. They ask not only what a text says, but why it says it, where it was placed, who was meant to see it, and what has been omitted. No single source fully accounts for the reign. A temple stela preserves ideology, a tomb object preserves material culture, a later catalogue organises surviving evidence. A modern study may clarify chronology while remaining dependent on fragmentary texts. Each contributes part of the picture, and each carries limits. What emerges is not a clean biography, but a layered construction. Amenhotep II was almost certainly a capable ruler with military experience, unusual investment in physical self-presentation, and a willingness to use severe punishment. Beyond that, certainty narrows. His private character, the exact scale of his violence, the accuracy of his athletic claims, and the real success of every campaign remain partly obscured. The monuments want him to appear simple, strong, divine, victorious, feared. History reveals something more difficult. Behind the image stands a ruler shaped by succession, empire, bureaucracy, religious expectation, and the need to perform power continuously. The records do not lie in only one direction. They preserve truth, exaggeration, omission, and memory together. To understand Amenhotep II, the historian must therefore listen not only to what the stone declares, but to what it refuses to say. The silence in the monuments becomes especially important when the reign begins to change. Amenhotep II's early years are loud with campaigns, captives, athletic boasts, and punishments arranged for maximum effect. His later rule appears less dramatically violent, not because Egypt abandons force, but because the empire may no longer need the same constant performance. Once the young king has proved that succession did not weaken the throne, the logic of government begins to shift from demonstration toward preservation. This quieter phase is easy to overlook. Royal history favours movement armies marching, cities falling, tribute arriving, enemies kneeling. Stability leaves fewer unforgettable images. A year without rebellion does not require a monumental scene. A successful negotiation may produce gifts and marriages rather than bodies on a ship. Administrative continuity rarely becomes the subject of a heroic inscription. As a result, Amenhotep II's reputation is dominated by the moments when he was most theatrical. Even though a reign lasting roughly a quarter of a century could not have been sustained by spectacle alone. The northern world remains complicated. Egypt still claims authority across parts of Syria Palest, while Mitanni continues to compete for influence. Neither power can easily control every city, road, and local ruler between them. Repeated campaigning is expensive. Armies consume grain, animals, equipment, and political attention. Even victory can damage the productive territories from which tribute is expected. An empire that fights continuously may prove its strength while exhausting the very system that supports it. Amenhotep II's later policy appears to recognize this limit. After the sharp interventions of his earlier reign, the surviving record suggests fewer major campaigns. This absence cannot be interpreted with complete confidence. Lost inscriptions may conceal actions that are no longer known, and scholars still debate the chronology and number of expeditions attributed to him. Yet the broad pattern points toward a ruler who gradually relies less on repeated northern invasion and more on established control, intimidation, local administration, and diplomacy. This does not make him peaceful in the modern sense. the threat of force remains essential. Garrisons, loyal rulers, tribute obligations, and military readiness continue to support Egyptian authority. The executions of the 7 northern leaders do not lose political value once the bodies are gone. Their memory becomes part of the empire's invisible defences. A punishment severe enough to be remembered can reduce the need to repeat it. Terror, in this sense, is most efficient when it changes behaviour before violence becomes necessary. Amenhotep II's early reign creates a reputation that his later government can spend. Foreign rulers considering resistance must account for what happened to those who tested him before. Egyptian officials can invoke the king's severity even when the king is not personally campaigning. The threat travels through stories, stelae, diplomatic messages, and the carefully maintained image of the warrior pharaoh. At the same time, political realities encourage accommodation. The rivalry between Egypt and Mitanni cannot be solved simply by destroying every intermediary state. Local rulers are not pieces that remain fixed after defeat. They have families, courts, alliances, economic interests, and access to competing powers. Egypt can often secure more by keeping a cooperative dynasty in place than by trying to govern each city directly. This is where tribute, hostages, diplomatic gifts, and elite exchange become as important as battle. A ruler who acknowledges Egyptian supremacy may retain local authority. His family may enter relationships with the pharaonic court. Precious goods move in both directions, although Egyptian texts prefer to describe most foreign offerings as tribute rather than equal exchange. Language preserves hierarchy even when practical diplomacy requires compromise. The sons of foreign rulers may be brought to Egypt and educated within the royal sphere. Such arrangements serve several purposes. They provide guarantees of loyalty, expose future leaders to Egyptian language and culture, and create personal ties to the court. A prince raised partly under Egyptian supervision may return home more inclined to cooperate, though the evidence remains incomplete and the outcomes surely varied. What royal ideology presents as submission may in practice involve negotiation, adaptation, and mutual advantage. Amenhotep II's court also participates in the broader exchange of luxury that binds the late Bronze Age powers together. Gold, crafted vessels, textiles, horses, timber, stone, metals, and prestige objects move between palaces. These goods are not merely wealth, they are diplomatic language. Their quantity, rarity, and quality communicate respect, status, and expectation. A shipment can soothe an insult, reward loyalty, or remind another court of Egypt's resources. The contrast with the king's martial propaganda is striking. The ruler who claims to crush enemies also depends on messengers carrying carefully worded communications. The pharaoh who presents himself as incomparable must negotiate with other kings who also consider themselves divinely favoured. Egyptian inscriptions avoid acknowledging equality, but international politics cannot always conform to domestic ideology. This tension may explain why the most aggressive royal language persists, even as practical policy becomes more restrained. Amenhotep II does not need to publicly announce that expansion has limits. He can maintain the image of boundless strength while quietly choosing not to pursue every opportunity for war. Controlled restraint is easier when it is disguised as unquestioned dominance. A campaign that reaches far north may allow Egypt to claim victory without establishing permanent occupation. Withdrawing afterward does not have to be presented as retreat. The king has punished rebellion, collected captives, received submission, and returned according to his own will. Royal narrative converts the end of a campaign into completion rather than limitation. The same technique applies to disputed territory. Egypt may continue naming distant regions as subject lands even when its actual control varies from year to year. A city that sends tribute once can remain symbolically conquered in Egyptian memory long after its loyalties become uncertain. The map of empire carved in temples is more stable than the political landscape it describes. Amenhotep II's later caution can therefore coexist with claims of absolute rule. He does not abandon the warrior identity because that identity makes caution safer. A ruler known for severity can negotiate without appearing helpless. A ruler feared by his subjects can choose not to punish every offense. His earlier brutality creates space for later selectivity. There are domestic reasons for stability as well. Temples, estates, mines, workshops, and regional administrations require predictable government. Officials who have survived the transition from Thutmose III can continue serving the dynasty. Building, ritual, taxation, and burial preparation all demand attention that endless campaigning would disrupt. The empire has to be lived in, not merely conquered. Amenhotep II's reign also produces objects of devotion and luxury that reveal a court concerned with more than war. Statues show the king presenting offerings. Fine craftsmanship links him to temple worship, elite consumption, and the international material culture of the age. The fragments associated with his burial remind us that his world includes coloured glass, precious materials, specialized artisans, and ceremonial innovation. These quieter traces complicate the image of a ruler defined only by blood. None of this erases the violence of his early campaigns. Caution after conquest does not transform punishment into mercy. It reveals instead that Amenhotep II's brutality has a strategic dimension. He uses extreme examples where he believes they will have the widest effect, then governs through the reputation those examples create. No single explanation fully accounts for the decline in recorded campaigning. Age, changing political conditions, successful intimidation, lost evidence, administrative priorities, and diplomatic opportunity may all have contributed. What survives suggests that the king who built his identity around physical action eventually learns the value of controlled stillness. The strongest ruler is not always the one who keeps striking. Sometimes power lies in convincing others that another blow can come at any moment. Amenhotep II's later reign rests on that suspended threat. The bow remains drawn in the imagination of the empire, even when the arrow is no longer released. The bow may remain suspended over the empire, but no king can suspend time. As Amenhotep II's reign advances, the question that once haunted his own accession begins to gather around the generation that will follow him. Egypt requires more than a powerful ruler. It requires a successor whose claim appears inevitable, whose body can carry the office, and whose ascent will not invite the same testing that greeted the death of Thutmose III. The royal family of Amenhotep II is only partially visible. Several princes and princesses are known from monuments and objects, but the order of births, the status of their mothers, and the shifting hierarchy within the palace remain difficult to reconstruct. Egyptian sources celebrate succession once it has succeeded. They are less generous about the uncertainty that comes before it. Sons who die early, lose favour, or fail to inherit can recede from the official record, leaving historians to recover their existence from scattered names and damaged inscriptions. Thutmose IV eventually takes the throne, but the path by which he becomes heir is not entirely clear. He may not have been Amenhotep II's eldest surviving son, and the evidence has encouraged speculation that another prince had once stood closer to the succession. Yet no surviving document provides a complete account of rivalry, exclusion, or sudden elevation. Scholars still debate how unusual Thutmose IV's position truly was, because royal succession in the 18th dynasty did not always follow a simple rule of eldest son to eldest son. The uncertainty matters because Amenhotep II's entire public identity rests on controlled continuity. He had answered his father's death by presenting himself as physically and militarily overwhelming. His successor would need a different foundation if his place in the line were less secure. That foundation appears most dramatically in the monument known as the Dream Stele, set between the paws of the Great Sphinx at Giza during the reign of Thutmose IV. The stele tells a carefully shaped story. Before becoming king, the young Thutmose rests near the Sphinx after hunting in the desert. Sleep comes over him in the heat of midday, and the great monument speaks in a dream. The Sphinx, identified with the solar god Horemakhet, promises him kingship if he clears away the sand that has gathered around the divine body. The future pharaoh obeys, restores the sacred monument, and receives the crown that the god has foretold. The scene is quiet compared with Amenhotep II's martial legends. No copper target is pierced, no enemy is bound, no foreign ruler hangs from a ship. The prince lies asleep beneath an ancient stone face while the desert closes around them. Yet the political purpose is just as strong. Divine choice replaces straightforward inheritance. Thutmose IV is not king merely because palace custom places him next in line. He is king because a god has selected him before the event. This kind of story becomes especially useful when succession requires explanation. If Thutmose IV had not originally been the expected heir, the dream provides sacred legitimacy independent of birth order. It does not openly attack rival claims or describe palace conflict. Instead, it rises above them. Human uncertainty disappears beneath divine intention. The stele should not be read as a private diary of an actual dream. It is a royal monument created after Thutmose IV has already become king. Its account is retrospective, shaped to explain and sanctify the present. The young prince's experience may preserve a genuine memory of hunting or restoration at Giza, but the finished inscription serves political needs. What survives in the record suggests a deliberate statement of legitimacy. Though no single explanation fully proves that Thutmose IV was a usurper or an unexpected choice. The location intensifies the message. The Great Sphinx is already ancient in Amenhotep II's time, created more than 1,000 years before his dynasty. By linking his succession to this monument, Thutmose IV ties himself to a depth of kingship far older than his father's reign. Amenhotep II had used physical strength to prove that he could carry forward Thutmose III's empire. His son reaches backward beyond both of them, drawing authority from the sacred landscape of Giza and the solar traditions embodied there. This may reflect a subtle shift in royal emphasis. Amenhotep II's legitimacy had been closely tied to Amun, conquest, and the image of the warrior king. Thutmose IV does not reject that inheritance, but the dream stele foregrounds a different divine relationship. The Sphinx speaks as Horemakhet, Horus in the horizon, connecting kingship to solar power and ancient memory. The son's claim is therefore not a copy of the father's. It is a new composition built from older stone. Amenhotep II's role in this transition remains obscure. He may have designated Thutmose as heir after the death or displacement of another son. He may have accepted a succession shaped by court alliances, maternal status, or the prince's own supporters. He may have trained several royal sons for possible rule, waiting until circumstances narrowed the choice. The sources do not preserve the private calculations of the palace. What can be inferred is that succession involves more than family affection. It determines which officials retain influence, which maternal relatives gain status, which temple networks receive favour, and which military companions stand closest to the next reign. A prince's elevation can reorder the court before the old king dies. Every title granted to an heir sends a signal. Every appearance beside the king establishes proximity to power. The army also matters. Amenhotep II had built strong ties to military culture, and a successor acceptable to commanders would help preserve stability. Yet the next pharaoh cannot rely only on soldiers. Priests must recognize divine legitimacy. Administrators must continue their work. Foreign rulers must believe that Egypt's authority survives another transition. The palace must create a story strong enough to satisfy all these audiences at once. The dream stele accomplishes this with remarkable economy. A prince sleeps, a god speaks, sand is cleared, a crown follows. The messy realities of dynastic politics vanish beneath a sacred exchange between ruler and monument. There is also something revealing in the restoration itself. Sand constantly gathers around the Sphinx, burying parts of its body and threatening to erase its form. Clearing it becomes an act of renewal. Thutmose IV presents himself as the prince who uncovers an ancient guardian and is rewarded with kingship. The symbolism is almost too perfect. The future king rescues royal memory from burial, and royal memory rescues his claim from uncertainty. Amenhotep II's reign had used the bodies of enemies to demonstrate what happens when order is challenged. The succession of Thutmose IV uses the body of the Sphinx to show how order is restored. One message is violent and immediate, the other is ancient and serene. Both turn public monuments into political proof. The uncertainty surrounding the succession does not mean the dynasty collapses. Thutmose IV takes the throne and preserves Egyptian power through a reign shorter than his father's, but significant in its own right. The transition succeeds well enough that later history remembers continuity rather than open crisis. That success may be the clearest evidence of Amenhotep II's later statecraft. A ruler famous for terror also leaves behind a functioning dynasty. Yet the dream stele preserves a faint shadow of doubt. Kings who inherit without question do not always need gods to explain why they were chosen. The monument stands between the paws of the Sphinx as both proclamation and concealment, revealing that legitimacy required reinforcement while refusing to say exactly what had made reinforcement necessary. Amenhotep II had spent his life turning uncertainty into performance. In youth, he answered it with athletic perfection. On campaign, he answered it with conquest and punishment. At the end of his dynastic story, uncertainty is answered once more, this time through a sleeping prince, an ancient god, and a promise spoken beneath the desert sun. The promise beneath the Sphinx belongs to the next reign, but Amenhotep II's own journey is moving toward a different landscape, one where royal bodies are expected to escape time, far from Giza, beyond the cultivated fields and the processional temples of western Thebes. A narrow valley cuts into the desert cliffs. Its silence is deceptive. Beneath the stone lie corridors, chambers, painted walls, shattered burial goods, hidden passages, and the remains of rulers who once claimed dominion over lands stretching beyond the horizon. Here, in the Valley of the Kings, the pharaoh who made fear travel across an empire prepares to disappear from the world of the living. His tomb is now known as KV35. Cut deep into the limestone, it follows a form associated with royal burials of the 18th dynasty descending corridors, changes of direction, pillared spaces, side chambers, and a burial hall designed to separate the dead king from the ordinary world. The path downward is not merely practical. It recreates a journey into the underworld, where the sun itself is imagined to pass through darkness before rising again. Amenhotep II, who had spent his reign presenting himself as tireless and divinely protected, now depends on ritual, architecture, and preservation to continue beyond death. The burial chamber carries images and texts associated with the Amduat, a composition describing the sun god's passage through the 12 hours of night. The walls do not celebrate copper targets, rowing contests, or northern campaigns. They turn instead toward regeneration. The king who once stood at the center of earthly order must now follow a cosmic route through danger, transformation, and rebirth. His survival no longer depends on soldiers or officials, but on correct knowledge, divine identification, and the continued effectiveness of funerary ritual. This shift does not erase his royal identity, even in death. Amenhotep II remains a king. His sarcophagus, burial equipment, protective objects, and inscriptions are intended to preserve his name, body, status, and relationship with the gods. Yet the tomb reveals another side of power. On temple walls, the pharaoh appears beyond injury. In the burial chamber, every detail acknowledges vulnerability. The body must be wrapped because it decays. Amulets must be placed because dangers are expected. Spells must be provided because the path is uncertain. Doors must be sealed because intrusion is possible. The burial equipment associated with KV-35 appears to have included objects both traditional and innovative. Much of it was damaged, removed, scattered, or disturbed before modern excavation, making complete reconstruction impossible. What survives suggests a royal funeral of considerable complexity, involving wooden figures, vessels, ritual objects, furniture, containers, and materials drawn from highly skilled workshops. The evidence remains incomplete, but even fragments reveal a world in which burial was one of the state's most demanding artistic projects. Among the smallest traces are pieces of coloured glass attributed to the tomb. These fragments are easy to overlook beside a royal mummy or monumental sarcophagus, yet they preserve an extraordinary material story. Glass production in the late Bronze Age requires specialised knowledge, controlled heat, mineral colorants, and access to technical traditions that circulated between major courts. A few broken vessel pieces can therefore reveal networks of craft, exchange, experimentation, and luxury stretching far beyond the burial chamber. They also complicate the image of Amenhotep II's age. His reign is remembered through violence and imperial control, but the same empire supports workshops capable of producing or acquiring delicate multicoloured objects. The court that sends bodies to distant frontiers also values surfaces of blue, yellow, white, and red arranged with remarkable precision. Brutality and refinement occupy the same world, sustained by the same wealth. The tomb's location is meant to protect that wealth through concealment. Unlike the great pyramids of earlier kings, the royal tombs of the New Kingdom are hidden in a remote valley. Their entrances can be covered, their corridors sealed, and their associated mortuary temples built separately on the edge of cultivation. The strategy recognizes a grim reality. Royal burials attract thieves because they gather enormous value in one place. Concealment ultimately fails. KV-35 is entered and disturbed in antiquity, like most royal tombs in the valley. Precious materials are removed, objects are broken, burial arrangements are altered. The king who had warned foreign rulers that no distance could protect them discovers, in death, that no stone corridor can guarantee security. Yet KV-35 acquires a second life more extraordinary than its first. Centuries after Amenhotep II's burial, Egypt enters periods of political weakness, economic strain, and widespread tomb robbery. Royal necropolis officials and priests face a crisis. The bodies of ancient kings, wrapped with valuable amulets and enclosed in costly coffins, have become targets. Tombs can no longer be defended reliably, and the institutions that once maintained their cults have changed or diminished. The response is both practical and deeply strange. Royal mummies are moved, priests enter ancient tombs, inspect damaged burials, restore wrappings where possible, identify bodies, and transfer them into more secure hiding places. These operations are not simple acts of theft. Although materials may have been reused and burial goods reorganized, they appear at least partly intended to save the royal dead from further destruction. KV-35 becomes one of these refugees. Amenhotep II's tomb, originally designed for one king and his burial world, receives the bodies of other rulers and royal individuals. Pharaohs from different generations are gathered together beneath the cliffs, removed from their own monuments, and placed inside the resting place of a man who had died centuries earlier. The tomb becomes less a private royal house than a hidden archive of dynastic mortality. The irony is severe. Amenhotep II had used dead enemies as political messages, placing bodies where they could be seen. His own tomb later becomes valuable because bodies can be placed where they will not be seen. The ruler who transformed death into spectacle becomes the silent guardian of kings concealed from public view. When Victor Lorre enters KV-35 in 1898, he encounters not the untouched burial of a single pharaoh, but a chamber crowded with layered history. Amenhotep II still lies within his own stone sarcophagus, an unusual survival in a valley where so many royal burials have been emptied or displaced. Around him are other mummified bodies, some placed inside chambers, their identities debated, reassigned, and studied across generations. The discovery is both archaeological triumph and human intrusion. Modern excavation brings the hidden kings back into light, but it also continues the long sequence of openings, movements, examinations, and reinterpretations that transformed the tomb after its sealing. Photographs, notes, museum transfers, anatomical studies, and later scientific testing make the dead accessible in ways their embalmers could never have imagined. Amenhotep II's mummy offers a direct encounter with the physical man behind the propaganda, but not a complete one. The body confirms mortality more clearly than personality. It cannot tell us how he spoke, whether he truly relished the punishments described in his inscriptions, or how closely his athletic image matched daily reality. It preserves remains, not motives. Even so, there is something powerful in the contrast. On stone walls outside the tomb, Amenhotep II remains eternally active, drawing bows, defeating enemies, receiving divine favour. Inside KV-35 the king is still. The arms once praised as stronger than those of ordinary men are folded into funerary order. The body that represented the entire state depends on linen, resin, priestly care, and darkness. The tomb also exposes the fragility of royal memory. Burial equipment can be shattered, names can be confused, mummies can be moved, statues can be altered for later kings. Objects can be separated from their original contexts and distributed across museums. Even a ruler who commanded scribes to carve his greatness in stone cannot control what later centuries will preserve. Yet KV-35 does preserve him, if not as he intended. It preserves Amenhotep II not only as conqueror, but as one dead king among many, surrounded by the remains of a dynasty that once seemed permanent. His tomb becomes a refuge because Egypt's sacred order eventually fails to protect its own rulers in their original resting places. Deep beneath the Valley of the Kings, the empire has collapsed into a chamber of bodies. The borders are gone. The tribute has stopped. The armies no longer march. The priests who moved the mummies have themselves vanished. What remains is the warrior Pharaoh in his sarcophagus, sharing the darkness with others who had once believed that kingship could outlast time. The darkness of Kef 35 strips Amenhotep II of the scale his monuments once gave him. He is no longer larger than soldiers, captives, officials, or foreign rulers. He is one preserved body among other royal dead, surrounded by fragments of a political world that could not preserve itself forever. Yet the image constructed during his lifetime remains difficult to escape. The unmatched archer, the relentless charioteer, the king who personally destroys rebellious leaders and sends one of their bodies hundreds of miles as a warning still dominates the way his reign is remembered. This is where judgment becomes difficult. Amenhotep II left enough evidence to support a reputation for calculated severity, but not enough to rank him confidently as the most violent pharaoh in Egyptian history. The phrase Egypt's bloodiest pharaoh belongs to modern dramatic framing rather than an accepted scholarly category. Egyptian records do not provide a reliable ledger of royal cruelty. Captive numbers are uncertain, campaign accounts are selective, and rulers across many dynasties presented themselves through images of conquest, punishment, and domination. Amenhotep II is not unique because he uses violence. Violence is deeply embedded in New Kingdom imperial expansion and in the much older visual language of kingship. His father campaigns repeatedly across the Levant. Later pharaohs record wars, executions, mass captures, destroyed settlements, and bound enemies. Rameses II turns the Battle of Kadesh into one of antiquity's greatest monuments of personal heroism. While other kings claim victories that archaeology and foreign records complicate. Amenhotep II belongs to this tradition, but he pushes certain elements of it with unusual intensity. His distinction lies in the union of body, punishment, and communication. His physical strength is made into political proof. His campaigns are narrated as personal contests. His captives are not merely counted but transformed into travelling warnings. The display of the 7 rulers links the northern and southern frontiers in a single performance of terror. Few details from Egyptian royal history reveal the strategic use of dead enemies so clearly. This makes it tempting to search for a psychological explanation. Was Amenhotep II personally cruel? Did he enjoy domination? Was his obsession with athletic superiority evidence of insecurity beneath the shadow of Thutmose III? Such interpretations are possible, but they move beyond what the evidence can securely establish. Royal inscriptions preserve the personality the throne required, not necessarily the private temperament of the man. A severe order may reflect individual character, political calculation, inherited convention, advice from officials, or several of these at once. The pressure of succession offers one important context. Amenhotep II inherits an empire built by an exceptionally successful father. Foreign rulers may test the new reign, while Egyptian elites compare the son with the conqueror they already know. The young king answers by intensifying personal kingship. He does not merely promise that Egypt's institutions remain strong. He presents himself as stronger than ordinary humans, faster than resistance, and more enduring than uncertainty. His early violence can therefore be understood as a form of proof The campaigns show that the army still marches. The executions show that rebellion still carries a terrible price. The inscriptions show that Amun still favours the throne. Each act addresses the fear that power might have weakened during succession. Yet political explanation does not erase responsibility. The 7 defeated leaders may have been used as symbols, but symbols made from human bodies still require human deaths. Captives absorbed into estates and workshops may vanish into administrative categories, but their displacement remains part of the cost of empire. The language of cosmic order does not make conquest bloodless. It makes bloodshed easier to present as necessary. Amenhotep II's reign therefore reveals how ideology can protect violence from moral scrutiny. When the king represents order and the enemy represents chaos, punishment requires little explanation. The ruler does not need to acknowledge the motives of rebels, the burdens of tribute, or the ambitions of rival states. The defeated are wrong because they have been defeated, and victory becomes evidence that the gods agreed. Modern historical judgment cannot simply adopt that logic. It must recognize the intelligence, political motives, and humanity of those whom Egyptian text reduced to rebels. At the same time, it cannot replace one simplification with another by imagining Amenhotep II as an irrational monster ruling only through blood. His empire depends on administration, diplomacy, religious patronage, regional cooperation, and economic exchange. His later reign appears more restrained than his early image suggests, and the transition to Thutmose IV indicates that the dynasty remained functional. He is therefore neither merely a butcher nor merely a ceremonial figure trapped inside propaganda. He is a capable imperial ruler who understands that fear can accomplish what occupation cannot. He uses exemplary punishment to shape distant behavior. He cultivates athletic legends because bodily strength offers an immediate language of authority. He supports temples because military power requires divine legitimacy. He depends on officials because no pharaoh, however large on a wall, can govern alone. His legacy survives in contradictions. A kneeling statue presents him offering vessels to Amun, calm and devout. A victory stela presents him as the protective wall of Egypt and the destroyer of rebellion. A falcon associated with his name extends his royal identity into the sacred image of Horus, the ruler as watchful predator. His tomb preserves luxury glass and sophisticated funerary equipment, beside the still body of a king remembered for motion and force. Later generations continue reshaping him. Statues can be appropriated, faces altered, and inscriptions reassigned to rulers such as Ramesses II. Royal identity, which seemed permanent when carved, proves vulnerable to later ambition. A monument may preserve the posture of Amenhotep II while carrying another king's name. Memory itself becomes conquered territory. Modern museums and scholarship produce yet another Amenhotep II. Archaeologists reconstruct KV-35. Conservators study objects. Historians compare campaign texts. Scientific analysis examines materials once placed in his tomb. Conferences return to a royal falcon discovered near Abydos, asking what it reveals about divine kingship and the survival of objects across changing sacred landscapes. The pharaoh continues to be assembled from fragments, each generation placing different questions before him. No final verdict can recover the complete man. The evidence remains incomplete, and the records were designed to prevent ambiguity rather than preserve it. But a careful judgment is still possible. Amenhotep II was a militarized king whose court celebrated extreme physical superiority, used severe and highly visible punishments, and understood terror as an imperial instrument. His reign demonstrates how fear, ritual, bureaucracy, and spectacle could work together to maintain Egyptian power. The blood-soaked throne behind the title is therefore not a seat occupied by one uniquely monstrous individual. It is the center of a wider system. The throne converts conquest into order, captives into resources, punishment into warning, and royal insecurity into divine certainty. Amenhotep II becomes its most vivid embodiment because he makes the machinery appear personal. The empire strikes through his arm, speaks through his inscriptions, and watches through the eyes of the falcon. That may be the darkest achievement of his reign. He convinces the world recorded by his monuments that the violence of an empire is the strength of one man, and that the strength of one man is the will of the gods. Beyond the inscriptions, the valley grows quiet again. Sand moves across abandoned paths, gathering against stone as it once gathered around the Sphinx. The river continues north, passing the remains of temples whose treasuries are empty, and cities whose names were once spoken with fear. The territories Amenhotep II claimed have long since become other countries, other languages, and other memories. His arrows no longer pierce targets. His horses no longer strain against their harnesses. The officials who recorded his victories, the soldiers who marched beneath his standards, and the rulers who resisted him are all equally beyond recovery. Some survive as names. Others remain only as categories carved by their enemies. Most have disappeared without leaving even that. Time has treated the victor and the defeated differently, but it has not spared either. Amenhotep II received a tomb, a sarcophagus, statues, and royal inscriptions. Yet his burial was entered, his equipment scattered, his image reused, and his history broken into fragments. The men displayed as warnings lost nearly everything, but the extremity of their treatment caused a trace of them to survive inside the king's own story. Memory has strange loyalties. Deep inside KV-35, royal power is reduced to stillness. The chamber holds no empire now. It holds the evidence that empires end. The king once imagined as a falcon above the world lies beneath a mountain, surrounded by rulers gathered there because even sacred tombs could no longer protect them. What remains is not certainty, but an outline in stone, a young prince trained to carry an empire, a king who transformed strength into propaganda, a conqueror who made punishment visible, and an aging ruler whose dynasty continued after his body failed. Around that outline lies darkness, filled with questions the monuments were never willing to answer. The Nile continues past Thebes as it did before Amenhotep II was born. At dawn, light reaches the eastern bank, crosses the water, and slowly touches the cliffs above the valley. For a moment the stone brightens, while the hidden corridors below remain cool and silent. Somewhere beneath them rests a pharaoh who spent his life proving that he could not be resisted. Preserved now by the one power he could never command the uncertain memory of those who came after him.